Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to do a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the CKF Tegral. First off, I want to thank my buddy Jim for sending this little guy along. Well, it's actually a pretty big guy. Much appreciated. Second thing, let's do a size comparison. Right here is your Ontario rat number 2 and your rat number 1. Of course, it wouldn't be my channel if the Spyderco Delica didn't jump into the picture, so this is a big knife right here. Here is a Benchmade 940 and another big knife, which is the ZTO 452 CF. And see, this is getting right up there. And it's kind of a crazy design. It's by Anton Malyshev. Oh, and then finally, another size comparison is this little guy right here. This is a reground Spyderco Recenti Nirvana, which is, well, one of the other few integral knives on the market. So actually, let's talk about that. This knife is what's called an integral knife. And what that means is that the handle is just one solid piece of, in this case, titanium. It is all throughout this knife is just one continuous chunk. These little inlays are a separate piece. I mean, you saw that the disassembly in the clip is a separate piece, but everything else is one continuous chunk, which is really neat. And then this is a Anton Malyshev design, who is a pretty well-known Russian knife designer. He usually does great work. So let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your CKF Tegral here. Okay, so first on the good side, I do love the overall rounding and contouring of the body here. This is a knife that really is taking advantage of the integralness by providing an interesting tactile experience. This isn't just sort of slab-sided. This has contours all throughout this, and so the entire thing, it not only is one cohesive chunk, but it feels like it, and that's very nice. And it actually leads to very nice ergonomics, at least for my smaller hands. The clip is in the right place, especially with this kind of carve-out here. I mean, this, ergonomically speaking, is just a great handle. And overall, I do love the rounding and whatnot on the body here. And this little, I mean, it's a nice design in a lot of ways, at least a very nice handle. Next thing, I do love these inlays very much, and I love them for two reasons. First off, they're attractive, and it adds a little bit of color. If this were just a gray beast, it would be a little less compelling. The other thing is it is clever, because as you saw in the disassembly video, this hides the stop pin, which allows you to take the stop pin out of this integral knife without, you know, having to do crazy things like on the Recenti here, where they actually, oh, I don't even know that I'll be able to point it out to you here. But, well, either way, they inserted a stop pin into here and then very carefully sanded it off there. So that's a nice little approach. Next thing, you can see that the steel on this little guy right here is M390. One of the top-of-line steels, no complaints there. The lockup on this guy is very, very solid. It's running around 30% here, but it just feels like a bank vault. And part of that is because, well, it is. It's just one chunk of metal here. And so these integrals always just have this sense of solidity to them that's just spectacular. And then finally, on the good side, the flipping action on this knife is pretty great. I'm a big fan of it. It fires reliably. It feels great in the hand. There's something really satisfying about flipping an integral knife. It's just great overall. So there you go. The flipping action is spectacular. It locks up very nicely. M390, great steel. I love these inlays, and I love the handle design overall. Let's talk about what's great here. On the great side is the body of this knife, and the integral body itself is just, it's beautifully done. This is not an easy thing to do, to take a solid billet of aluminum and then carve out enough area for the blade, but not so much that the geometry is out of whack and keep your tolerances in there. It is really odd, and they did a great freaking job of it. This is a very solid knife. It's very easy to maintain as a result of being an integral. You just unscrew here, you pop the pivot out, and the blade comes out, no problem. It makes it a lot more unique. There are not many production integrals out there. I mean, the Nirvana here is another exception, but there aren't that many of them out there, and frankly, it is just well done overall. I mean, the integral cutout on this, it's very easy to imagine this just being a flat surface in there and with a terrible finish, but if we look inside there, we can see that there's actually a rounded surface in there, and more so, the finish on the inside of this knife is just as good as the finish on the outside. This is technically very well done, and I respect the heck out of this handle in a deep way. So, to me, that's what's great, is that the body of this knife is really stellar, both in that it is an integral and that it's a well-done one. So, there you go. Let's talk about what's bad here. Okay, so on the bad side, first off, this blade shape just does not do it for me at all. Because it's got a non-committal recurve, like it's a recurve, but it's not enough of a recurve to be a recurve. It's just like, recurve-ish. And so that bugs the crap out of me. The knife itself is a little bit thick, it's a little thick behind the edge, and frankly, it feels a little bit underdone overall. I just, this blade is, it's like they ran out of money doing this part and then just, we'll put a blade on there, put a harpoon maybe. But they, for instance, if they ground a swedge in here, I think it would have been more compelling or something along those lines. This part of this knife just doesn't do it for me at all. That's aesthetics, maybe you'll love it, but it doesn't do it for me. Next thing, the price on this guy is high. I don't think it's out of line though. It's $475, but look, this is an integral knife made out of M390 steel. This is not something that is going to be cheap. But it is still a lot of money, and that's going to put it off the table for a bunch of folks. Next thing, this does not have an over-travel stop, meaning that it is possible to push this lock bar way out that way, and in fact to spring the lock bar. This is possible with a lot of frame locks. In fact, it's only recently that those over-travel stops have become a thing. But the thing is, on most knives, if you spring the lock bar, if it goes too far in this direction, what you do is you take the knife apart, and, well, ideally you will send it back to the manufacturer. But still, you could rebend it by bending it back the other direction very carefully, very, very slowly. Just send it back. But on this guy, unfortunately, you can't do that because, well, the other scale is on the other position here. You can only bend it this far, so that means you need to use heat, or more likely you're just sending it back to the manufacturer. So I'd like to see an over-travel stop, even though I know that's really hard to do on an integral. So, I guess there you go. Then, coming into more substantial issues that probably should have been addressed. The knife is very heavy. Let's be real here. Comes in at 4.98 ounces for a blade that's freaking heavy. And a big part of that is because this back part is actually very thick. I mean, if we look at it here, this lanyard hole is just a hole full of air, and so a good part of this handle is also full of air. And I feel like it's not a great. There's too much junk in the trunk here, and I like some junk in the trunk, but this is getting to be a little bit much here. And as an unfortunate result of that, the balance on this knife is pretty far back. I mean, you're looking at something, it feels like it balances around here, and it's a little awkward in the hand. I'm not a big fan of that particularly. Then finally, well, not quite finally, but the close on this guy isn't actually all that smooth. The opening action is great, but the closing action is kind of a shake shut. It's not really that impressive as a closing action. And then finally, on the bad side, is that there is very little texturing here. I mean, you can see this is a stonewash, well, no, actually, this is machine finish, but still. This is a machine finish titanium here, and there's not much to grab onto. And so if you're ever in a lubricated sort of situation, or a damp situation, this knife is going to be pretty easy to have coming out of your hand. The only real source of texturing is this little area of grip here in the clip itself. So, those are, to me, what's bad about this knife, is that there's very little texturing. The closing isn't that smooth. It's very heavy. There's a lot of extra weight in the back here, partly due to this lanyard hole, which I'd prefer that had just been taken out altogether, but I'm not a lanyard guy. There is no over-travel stop, although that's hard to do. The stakes are high here. The price is high, I think justifiable, and the blade shape just doesn't do it for me. Let's talk about the ugly here. So on the ugly side, the big one to me is this little region right here. There is no sharpening choil here. I mean, that's patently obvious. But the thing is, not only is there no sharpening choil, but the plunge grind is very, very wide here. There is this large sort of radius to get down to the actual blade width. And so what this means is that this knife has a pretty large amount of unsharpened area. And in fact, it's an unsharpened area that you can pretty easily come into as you're using this for cuts. I don't tend to love knives where the cutting edge just kind of fades away after getting thicker and thicker here. But this feels especially flagrant because there's just so much unsharpened area with this plunge being just so wide. I kind of wish that the plunge grind was much, I don't even know how to put it, but, you know, it was a little bit narrower there. So that at the very least, the unsharpened area was much smaller. But yeah, so to me, that's really ugly. Give me a sharpening choil, or at least make the plunge a little smaller so that unsharpened area is a little more subtle, because this is pretty out of control here, guys. So that's the ugly, is that whole little region there needs a little bit of love. But let's go to your final conclusions here. Look, This knife reminded me how much I love the idea of an integral knife, because there are so many good things to it. I mean, they're very easy to maintain when they're done right. They're very, very simple in their construction and overall, and the solidity is just great. A good integral feels excellent in the hand, and indeed, this is a well-executed integral, because there's a lot of good stuff here. Intellectually, this is just a great knife. I mean, I love the solidity. Aesthetically, when it's closed, I love this knife. But the thing is, practically and functionally, it's not all that interesting to me. It's not a knife I wanted to reach for. It's a little heavy. It's weirdly balanced. It's not that well textured, and the blade, I'm going to be honest, just rubs me the wrong way. And so, maybe if the design, at least if this half of the design speaks to you a little bit more, you'd be much more interested in this knife. But as it stands, the Tegral is one of those knives that I respect deeply. This is one heck of a knife in terms of making heck of a knives. And I want to applaud CKF for making it. This was a ballsy move. But unfortunately, it's not a knife that I particularly like, and it's not a knife that I would want to carry. So for me, the Tegral it's a fine knife, and if you love the look of it, then do it. There's a lot of quality here. But for me, it's more a knife that reminds me of what I want to look for in other integrals, rather than one that makes me want to grab this knife itself. That's kind of a matter of taste. If you're after it, hey, why not? It might be integral to your collection. That was really terrible. Anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.